The walls in Nadia's apartment were thin enough that the world outside often felt like it pressed right through them. On some nights, she could hear the neighbor's television, or the rhythmic tapping of someone typing late into the evening. But tonight, it was her own world that seemed amplified by those fragile walls, the sound of her daughter's small, hungry sobs echoing faintly into the hallway. Amina had tried to be strong. She always did. She was only 6, but she had learned far too early to read her mother's expressions, to sense when things were tight, to swallow her questions when she sensed they might hurt. But hunger was harder to hide, harder to pretend away. It gnawed at her gently all afternoon, then fiercely as night crept in. And now, despite curling into her blanket and pressing her cheek against her stuffed rabbit, she couldn't stop the trembling in her voice. "Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling, "my tummy hurts." Nadia knelt beside her, brushing a stray curl from the girl's forehead. In the dim light of the apartment, one lamp turned on to save electricity, her eyes looked older than her 29 years. "I know, Habibti," she murmured softly. "We're fasting today, remember. It's good for the heart." She said it calmly, gently, just as she had earlier that morning when she realized there was only tea left in the kitchen. When she realized that the last bit of bread had already gone to Amina the night before. When she checked her phone and saw her bank balance, numbers so low they almost felt like an insult. Rent had gone through. The power bill had taken the last of what she'd saved. And payday was still 5 days away. Something inside her had cracked quietly then, but she'd swallowed it down like everything else. Fasting. It was the only explanation she could think of, something that sounded intentional, virtuous, purposeful. She had fasted before for religious reasons, but this wasn't that. This was necessity dressed up as choice. Amina tried to nod bravely, but tears slipped down the side of her face. "But Mama, you're hungry too." Nadia smiled weakly, though her stomach twisted sharply. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I've had tea, and tea keeps the hunger quiet." But it didn't. She'd been lightheaded all day at work, folding clothes in the back of the thrift shop where she'd found a part-time job. She hadn't told her coworkers. She hadn't told anyone. Pride, she supposed, could be as stubborn as hunger. But what kind of mother was she, fasting because she had no food for her child? She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, breathing carefully. When she opened them again, she saw Amina trying to muffle her sniffles in her blanket. "Come here," Nadia whispered. She lifted the thin child into her arms, hugging her tightly. Amina curled into her chest like she used to do when she was a toddler, small arms gripping her shirt. Nadia rocked gently, humming a lullaby her own mother used to sing. But as she hummed, her voice wavered. She rested her chin atop her daughter's head, wishing she could shield her from everything, the rising bills, the empty fridge, the sense of failure that crept in with every unpaid hour of work. Minutes passed like that, slow and heavy, until Amina's sobs softened. Not because she wasn't hungry, Nadia knew that, but because she was tired of crying. The kind of exhaustion that came from emotion rather than effort. "Let's try to sleep early," Nadia said quietly. "Tomorrow will be better." A lie she desperately wanted to be true. She tucked Amina back into the couch, it doubled as her bed since they had moved here, and pulled the blanket to her chin. She kissed her temple, whispered goodnight, and stood up slowly, her joints aching. But as she walked toward the kitchen, she heard something, a faint rustling from the other side of the wall, followed by a soft scrape. Someone next door was moving. Her neighbor, Amir, a quiet man in his 30s who worked from home and always greeted them politely in the hallway. He didn't know anything about her situation. No one did. Nadia opened the cupboard one last time, staring into the emptiness inside. A single tea bag, half a packet of salt, a can of diced tomatoes she had been saving for a proper meal, and a box of instant noodles she had already checked 4 times before remembering that it was empty. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. She wasn't sure whether the sting she felt came from tears or simple exhaustion. Behind her, Amina whimpered again. A small, nearly silent sound, but the kind that pierced a mother's heart like a needle. Nadia turned to comfort her. And that was when Amir froze on the other side of the wall, his hand hovering over a drawer. He had been sorting receipts, half distracted, when he heard the first muffled sob. He ignored it at first, kids cry, after all. But then he heard it again. And again, softer each time, as if trying not to be heard. Something wasn't right. He sat still for a moment, listening. Then came the mother's voice, gentle, soothing, but trembling underneath. And one sentence slid through the wall with perfect clarity. "We're fasting today." Amir frowned. Today wasn't a religious fasting day. Not one he knew of, anyway. And something about the tone, it wasn't celebratory or peaceful. It was strained, heavy, almost apologetic. Then came the child's whisper, "Mama, you're hungry too." Amir's heart tightened. He stood abruptly, hesitated, then walked to his front door. His mind raced through possibilities. Was it his place to interfere? Would he embarrass her? Offend her? But the next tiny sob settled the question. He couldn't just ignore it. He stepped into the hallway. The building was quiet, the lights dim and slightly flickering as they often did. He stood in front of Nadia's door for a moment, inhaling deeply, preparing himself for however awkward this might be. Then he knocked, softly at first. Nothing. He knocked again, a little louder. This time he heard footsteps, slow and uncertain. The door cracked open an inch, revealing Nadia's tired eyes, red from holding back tears. "Oh, Amir," she said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" Her voice tried to sound normal, but he could hear the strain. "I heard something," he said gently. "Is everything all right with Amina?" Nadia's fingers curled tightly around the doorframe. She hesitated. The instinct to protect her pride warred with the reality of their situation. Her eyes flicked back toward her daughter, then returned to him. "She's fine. Just tired." But Amir could see her exhaustion, see the dim apartment behind her, see the anxious tension in the air. And then he heard it, a small sniffle from inside. "Amina, may I come in?" he asked quietly. Nadia swallowed. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then finally, slowly, she stepped aside. "Okay," she whispered. Amir entered, and the truth unfolded in front of him like a silent confession. The sparse kitchen, the child curled on the sofa, the way Nadia's hands shook even as she tried to hide them. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked Amina softly. The girl hesitated, looking at her mother with pleading eyes. Nadia closed hers for a moment, fighting tears. She could lie again, pretend, protect the last fragile piece of her dignity. But she was so tired. Amina whispered, "Mama said we're fasting, but I'm hungry." And Nadia's heart finally broke open. She pressed her hands to her face, her voice cracking completely as she admitted the truth she had been holding in like a breath she couldn't release. "I told her we're fasting because we don't have food left." The words dissolved into a quiet, defeated sob. Amir stood very still, the weight of the moment settling like a stone in his chest. He understood now. All of it. And in that instant, he knew exactly what he needed to do. "I'll be right back," he said, and before Nadia could protest, he was already rushing out the door. Amir returned only a few minutes later, but to Nadia it felt like an entire hour of breathless waiting. She had closed the door after him, leaning against it as though her legs had suddenly forgotten how to hold her. Amina had curled up with her stuffed rabbit, half asleep from emotional exhaustion, a tiny frown still etched on her face. The apartment was so quiet that Nadia could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, an empty refrigerator, and the quiet ticking of the cheap clock on the wall. Every second was thick with worry. What if she had embarrassed herself? What if Amir thought she was unfit to be a mother? What if word spread and people whispered behind her back? Shame piled on shame until it felt hard to breathe. And yet beneath all the fear, an even deeper ache pulsed through her, a longing for help she didn't know how to ask for. She had grown used to being the one who solved problems, the one who never imposed, the one who smiled through difficulty. Ever since Amina's father left 3 years ago, she had learned to carry everything alone. Work, bills, school forms, bedtime fears, everything. People admired her strength, but the truth was simpler, she had no other choice. She paced the small living room, fingers trembling. What would Amir bring? Did he think she needed charity? Her pride curled tightly inside her chest. She wiped her eyes repeatedly, trying to make herself look put together. She even straightened the blanket on the couch, as though the state of her furniture somehow reflected the state of her life. Then came the knock. Not loud, not hurried, but firm, certain. She opened the door, and froze. Amir stood there holding 3 grocery bags, the kind that stretched so full they looked ready to burst. His breathing was slightly heavy, as if he'd been rushing, but his expression was steady and warm. "I found a few things at the store," he said quietly. "I hope it's okay." Nadia blinked. Her throat tightened instantly. "Amir, you didn't have to." "Please," he said, stepping inside gently but confidently, as though he wanted to spare her the discomfort of deciding. "Let me put these down." She stepped aside without realizing it, her hands fluttering helplessly at her sides as he carried the bags into the kitchen. He set them on the counter one by one, and each soft thump felt like a lifeline being laid out in front of her. Bread, eggs, flour, milk, rice, lentils, a bag of potatoes, tomatoes, fresh fruit. Vegetables. Even a box of cookies with a cartoon bunny on the front, the exact brand Amina smiled at whenever they passed it in the store. Amir, she began again, but her voice broke. She pressed a hand to her mouth. He turned toward her, his expression gentle but resolute. I know you didn't ask, he said softly. That's the only reason I didn't wait for permission. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, trying to steady herself. I can't take this, she whispered, though the words felt small, weak, unconvincing even to her. You can, Amir replied firmly. And you will. Not because you owe me anything. But because no mother should have to pretend fasting is a choice when it's not. Nadia's shoulders trembled. A sob escaped her, small at first, then larger, as if someone had poked a hole in a dam she had tried to reinforce with bare hands. She turned away, covering her face, embarrassed by the flood of emotion. Amina stirred on the couch, rubbing her eyes. She sat up slowly, blinking in confusion as she saw the bags. Mama, what is this? Nadia opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Amir knelt beside the girl and smiled gently. It's food, sweetheart. Enough for you and your mom for a while. Amina looked at the cookies, her eyes widening with cautious hope, hope so pure that it broke Amir's heart. Can I have one? She asked shyly. Of course, he said warmly. That's why they're here. Amina took the box carefully, as though it might disappear if she moved too quickly. She hugged it to her chest, a small smile blooming on her face, a smile Nadia hadn't seen in days. Nadia watched her daughter, her heart both breaking and swelling at once. She brushed her fingers across her cheeks, wiping the tears already drying there. You've done too much, she whispered to Amir. He shook his head. Not enough. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of silence where words weren't needed, where something deeper connected them, human decency, shared empathy, a compassion that wasn't pity but recognition. Finally, Amir took a breath. If you're okay with it, he said, I'd like to make you both dinner tonight. Something warm. Something real. Nadia's lips parted in surprise. You want to cook here? He smiled shyly. I make a decent chicken stew. Nothing fancy, but better than anything you've had from a can, I promise. Amina hopped off the couch instantly, cookie box still in hand. Chicken stew. Mama, can we? Nadia looked between them, her daughter's hopeful eyes, Amir's earnest expression, and felt something inside her soften, uncoil, breathe for the first time in months. Yes, she whispered. Yes, please. Amir rolled up his sleeves dramatically, making Amina giggle. All right then. Chief potato peeler, report for duty. She giggled even louder, rushing to the kitchen. Me, she squealed. I get a job. You sure do, he said with a grin. Very important one. Nadia leaned against the doorway, watching them. Something warm spread through her chest, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and something else she hadn't felt in a long time, safety. As Amir chopped vegetables, he chatted with Amina in a gentle, playful tone, asking about school, about her stuffed rabbit, about her favorite foods. The little girl answered between bites of her cookie, crumbs covering her shirt, her earlier tears completely forgotten. Nadia found herself smiling. Really smiling. Not the forced smile she wore at work or at school meetings. A real one. The smell of cooking slowly filled the apartment, onions sizzling, spices warming, chicken browning, broth simmering. It wrapped around the room like a blanket. Nadia inhaled deeply, feeling her stomach rumble sharply for the first time all day. You should sit, Amir said softly, glancing at her with concern. She shook her head. No, I want to help. He handed her a spoon. Then stir, but gently. This stew is moody. She laughed, an unexpected, light sound that surprised even her. For the next 20 minutes, the apartment transformed. From a place of hunger and shame to a space of warmth and laughter. Amina danced around with her stuffed rabbit, humming. Nadia tasted the broth and nearly cried again from the simple joy of real food. Amir watched her with a quiet, steady gaze, never pitying, just present. When the stew was finally ready, they ate together at the small kitchen table. Amina devoured her bowl with delight, dipping bread into the broth. Nadia ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling strength return to her limbs. Halfway through the meal, she looked at Amir, her eyes soft but filled with intensity. You didn't just feed us, she said quietly. You reminded me we're not invisible. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for his spoon, stirring his stew absently. No one should have to struggle alone, he said finally. Especially not when help is only one door away. Nadia lowered her gaze, overwhelmed again. When they finished eating, Amir stood, washing the dishes despite her protests. Amina fell asleep on the couch, this time with a full stomach and a peaceful expression. As Amir dried his hands and moved toward the door, Nadia followed him. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." He met her eyes, his voice soft. "Anytime." And as he left, Nadia realized something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. Tomorrow might truly be better.